Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Welcome to episode 139 of Sports Management Podcast. Did you know that 65% of you who listen to this podcast do not yet subscribe? That means that you are at risk of missing out new episodes, and with the lineup that I have for 2024, that is not something you want to miss. So hit that subscribe button on your podcast app, and together we will grow Sports Management Podcast. Thank you. Today's guest is Jacob Turner, the co-founder of Moment Private Wealth and a former MLB player. Jacob was drafted in the first round 9th overall by Detroit Tigers in the 2009 MLB draft. Now he's a financial advisor helping athletes with their finances. We spoke about signing a $7 million MLB contract, what he bought for his signing bonus, how to choose a financial advisor, the downsides of being an athlete, financial mistakes athletes make, reward versus lifestyle purchases, why he quit baseball, and much more. Jacob Turner, welcome to the Sports Management Podcast.
Marcus, thanks for having me on, man. Looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. So you were drafted first round, 9th overall by the Detroit Tigers in the 2009 MLB draft. So what is your strongest memory from that day?
My two strongest memories is one, I can remember not being in a great mood because with the baseball draft, there's a ton of unknowns around it. So although I had this great season, I wasn't 100% sure if I was actually going to get drafted where I wanted to get drafted. My second memory, though, was I remember when Bud Selig, who was the commissioner at the time, called my name, Jacob Turner, Westminster Christian Academy, just running over and giving my dad a big hug and just saying we did it because it was such a we moment. My dad had really been there through everything from Little League Baseball coaching me to taking me all the practices to the tournaments. So it was a whirlwind of emotions for sure that entire day.
I'm sure. Building up to that, how did you start with baseball in the first place?
Yeah, I grew up in a household with two other brothers. I was the middle of three, and we just loved sports. I mean, we played hockey, we played soccer, we played baseball. We just loved sports growing up. And ultimately, actually, my older brother really loved baseball. I really loved ice hockey at the time. And kind of as we started to get older, I would always play up on his team. I realized okay, I'm pretty good at this baseball thing. And then at the same time, I had an injury with ice hockey and I was really starting to kind of level up with my baseball career. My parents were like, maybe we'll just focus on baseball when you come back. So that was the end of my hockey career. And then really the focus of let's focus full time on baseball as I started to move in towards middle school, high school age.
I see. So I'm a hockey guy, so glad to see we share that interest.
Oh, I love hockey, man. I love hockey. I have a 6-year-old son and he plays ice hockey.
I was going to say, I think I saw some pictures of your son on the hockey field, so that's awesome. So yeah, being drafted and what you're doing now with the financial advising. So obviously there is a lot of money involved in pro sports and you signed a pretty huge contract yourself. So with regards to money, did you feel that changed you in any way when you signed and got that amount of money?
I think I described it as it changes everything and it changes nothing because I don't want to discount what money does for you in your life. I mean, we live in a world that you need money to survive essentially. And the peace of mind that having money can give you is incredible. So I don't want to discount money from that standpoint, but I will say that money doesn't inherently change who you are. I think it exemplifies who you already are. And for me, I didn't play baseball because I thought this was an opportunity for me to earn a bunch of money. I played baseball because I really loved competing. I loved baseball. I loved the sport. I loved getting better. That led to signing this contract where I got this money. But money is this weird dynamic. And especially when you get it all at once, that you can kind of go one of two ways. You can spend it all and you can spend nothing. So happy to chat more about that.
Yeah, definitely. We will get into that a little bit later, of course. So, but on this point, I read that your mom sat you down after you signed and just showed you basically that, what disappeared in taxes and how much you actually earned in the end.
Yeah, my mom had an accounting background and she introduced me to Excel. So for those of you that don't know, Excel is a great way for you to be able to see what you might owe with percentages and things like that. And she broke this down of like, if I sign for X millions of dollars, here's roughly how much it's going to go to taxes. And then here's how much that you could kind of live on if you had a certain percentage. And I just remember seeing the tax number and thinking, oh my gosh, like I'm going to pay that much in taxes. And I had never had a steady job, so to speak, to be able to see like what a paycheck consistently looked like. So it was shock and awe.
So when did the interest for finance start?
I would say probably from like the time I saw that Excel document. I'd always loved understanding how the world works. I'd always been fascinated by how people made money, specifically businesses in general, businesses that you didn't hear about, so to speak. And I was always fascinated by how people spent money. And then when I came into money, I took this stance of like I call it being the CEO of your own life. I wanted to have people around me that were professionals that I could lean on, but I also wanted to really understand what was going on. Part of that's just my own mental framework and how I start to think about things. I like to understand before I really kind of give somebody the reins, so to speak. And for me, signing this money, I felt like it was a huge responsibility. I wanted to be a good steward of it. I knew that if I did this right on the upfront, it could have a really long impact for me in a really positive way. And I probably read more personal finance books than any professional athlete in that time. And that was kind of the impetus for like me getting into this personal finance and understanding that like I like this and understanding that frankly, there's a lot of guys out there that don't have the education around it.
Definitely. And that's what we will chat more about, of course, now. And one very, very scary statistic that I heard was that 80% of NBA and NFL players go broke within 5 years after leaving the league. And I mean, they earned a lot of money during this time. So it's obviously a problem. So now in your role as a financial advisor, what is it that you talk to these athletes about and how to handle this money? What are you advising them on?
Well, I think there's a million things you could talk about. From the most simple, basic, foundational element, it's making sure that you don't build a lifestyle that's unsustainable. So what I mean by that is if you sign a contract for $10 million and after taxes, we'll say you get $6 million of it, you can't build a lifestyle that costs you $1 million a year with $6 million saved. Okay, I know $6 million is a lot of money, but the reality is you're not going to be able to earn enough from an investment portfolio, whatever those assets look like, to sustain $1 million of spending a year. So you need to make sure you understand that your spending should be based on what you could sustain long term, not what your salary is this year.
So you have also talked about reward purchases versus lifestyle purchases.
Being able to buy something and being able to afford something are two vastly different things. And we see a lot of athletes have nice cars, and oftentimes I think that's fine. Like they're reward purchases, and that's something that you can buy. Certainly, you have enough money to buy it, but could you afford to do that? And what I mean by afford to do that is like every couple of years, could you buy that same car? Sometimes the answer is yes, but sometimes the answer is no. That doesn't always mean that you should or shouldn't buy it. You just need to understand the difference between a reward purchase and a lifestyle purchase. A reward purchase, you do it one time. You're rewarding yourself for a lot of hard work. Maybe you got the contract, maybe you got the bonus, whatever it is. You're rewarding yourself for that. And I think that's great. A lifestyle purchase is something that you can continue to do on a sustainable basis over and over and over again without the expectation that any more significant money is coming in.
Did you buy any reward purchase after your first paycheck?
Yeah, I wish I had some amazing story of like some crazy purchase I made and how I regret it. But the reality was, I think athletes go one of two ways. They either spend everything or they spend nothing. And I certainly tilted more towards the spending nothing thing. I remember when I first signed, my big purchase was I bought a MacBook Pro, which at the time I think was like $1,000, maybe $1,200. So in the grand scheme of things, not a huge amount of money. I actually didn't end up buying a new car. I bought the car that I had previously from my parents, which was a great car. I didn't need a $100,000 Range Rover or something like that. And I think I started to learn over time like what I could and couldn't spend money on. But essentially, when I first signed, as much of a blessing as the money was, there was a lot of anxiety around it. I didn't want to be on 30 for 30 broke and felt like I blew this money. So there was anxiety around learning how to spend the money.
Yeah, so you mentioned also that your mother had an accounting background and your father, I believe, was an entrepreneur, right?
Yep.
Did you take any learnings from money management from your home to watching your parents?
Yeah, a bunch of learnings. One, we always lived below our means from a really basic money standpoint. My parents made good money. We lived a good lifestyle, but they certainly lived below their means. At the same time, I think they did a great job of being able to spend money in a way that created memories. And you don't really realize that as a kid, but, and I think back to some of the best memories I have. It wasn't the stuff that they potentially bought us. It was the trips that they were able to take us on, or was the experiences that we were able to have. So that was one big lesson. I think the other big lesson was I can remember my parents had a cash drawer in 2008 when the market was really in the tanks. I remember we had this cash drawer, and it was essentially like, if there's not money in this cash drawer, and when I say cash drawer, I mean like my mom would put cash in there at the beginning of the week, and it was used for going out to eat or extracurricular expenditures, whatever it may be. And if there wasn't any money in there on Saturday night, my dad wanted to go out to eat. It was like, we weren't going out to eat. And it was just a great lesson for me. Like, did they have the money to do it? Sure, they did. But the reality was, like, they were budgeting, and it was the lack of automation in this process that helped them stick to it.
I see. Jumping into a moment, private wealth, being a financial advisor is kind of a broad term. So can you explain a little bit what that term means and why you decided to start your own firm?
Yeah, I would argue that being a financial advisor is one of the broadest terms out there, because people could say they're a financial advisor and that could mean 100 different things. So really what we do is we really sit at the center of the client's life. And, there's 5 areas that we cover: everything from cash flow to tax planning to insurance products to risk management to estate planning, but really making sure that if it has a dollar sign in front of it, we want to be giving advice on it. And I think one of the biggest value adds I feel like is out there for people if they're looking to potentially engage with an advisor is you want to make sure somebody that is looking at the entire financial picture, right? Like, there's so much more to money management than just investing money or just implementing some product or solution.
How to choose your financial advisor? What questions should you ask them to know that you're getting someone who is legit?
Yeah. So I just made a YouTube video on this with 10 questions that I think you could ask. But I think first and foremost, I would just ask what they specialize in. In 2024, more than ever, financial advice is becoming more and more specific. So let's take an example and let's use a doctor. If I broke a bone in my arm, I would go to my general doctor and he would say, it looks like you have a broken bone. You probably need to go see an orthopedic surgeon. I would go see an orthopedic surgeon. That orthopedic surgeon would then tell me, well, you broke this specific bone in your arm. And because of that, this guy down the hall, he works specifically on that bone. So I'm going to refer you to him. He's going to do the surgery. Everything's going to be great. That is the same stance that you should take if you're going to hire a financial advisor. Who do you specialize in? What does that person look like? Does it look like me? Have you done that work before? Because ultimately, personal finance is inherently personal. And the complexities that you might face are going to be vastly different than somebody that maybe is a professional athlete.
Definitely. So if we focus on professional athletes, that comes with more money than the regular Joe, so to speak. So what type of investments or tax deductions, or is it, I guess it's a little bit different working with these high income people?
Yeah, yes and no. I think the frameworks stay the same no matter if you're making, $10 or you're making 10 million bucks. From a tax perspective, athletes have certain things they have to deal with because they're playing in all these different states. So they're paying taxes in all these different states. But then on the flip side of it, there's a lot of things that are really similar because they're a W-2 employee. They're not a business owner outside of money that's maybe off the field, but the majority of their income is going to be on the field, usually outside of like maybe the NBA. So from a tax planning perspective, they might be really similar to a typical high earner that's a corporate executive. But there are complexities from a tax planning standpoint to make sure that you understand the nuances that come with being a professional athlete, earning money in this really short time period. As far as investments go, again, I think it starts at the base level of saying, we want to build out an investment portfolio that allows you to compound for the longest period in time. The biggest advantage that an athlete has is that they are getting this money at a really young age. So what we want to do is we want to say, hey, the biggest strength that you have is time. And what can we do to invest this money to make sure that we stay in the game as long as possible? One of the biggest mistakes I see in investing is people always look at what the potential upside is. What return could I earn? And they fail to often look at what the downside is. And if we can avoid the downside in a lot of situations and earn a really solid rate of return over a really long period in time, you will be far richer than you can ever imagine just from compounding in time.
The common knowledge is like real estate is a safe bet over time, for example. And if you have a higher income, that might be something that you can afford. Is that still the case, or should you go to the stock market? There were bitcoins, are there some that call it more safe areas than others, or?
Yeah, we break it down into three buckets. So the first bucket is what I call the war chest, and this is really our safe assets. These are things that are cash equivalents, or bonds, where we're paying somebody money and they're giving us a yield back by essentially loaning out our money. These are much safer on the spectrum of investments, but your return is going to be significantly lower. But they're also a really important part of your overall picture. The second area is really the core portfolio or the growth strategy. And this is often a really diversified group of either public market investments like the stock market and or real estate positions that we feel like are really high quality assets to own that we can own for a really long time and let them compound. And that's going to really be where the majority of the money is. And then the third aspect, the third bucket that I would call it is the aspirational bucket, where if we have enough money in buckets 1 and 2, and we want to start exploring in buckets 3 and taking on a potentially more risk, but having potentially more upside, we can go ahead and do that because we know that, hey, if we see a significant decline or maybe these assets even went to zero, we still have enough in buckets 1 and 2 to continue to living our lifestyle. So that's where I think you start to come into some of the more speculative plays like a Bitcoin, whether it's private equity, venture capital, investing in your own business, investing in a friend's business, all these things that could have a potentially much higher rate of return also come with significantly more unknowns.
For sure. And you mentioned taxes, and of course in the US there are different tax rates in different states. So that's also something to take into consideration when signing as an athlete.
Yeah. So as an athlete, I mean, the three buckets for taxes that I typically break it down is like you're going to pay, FICA and Medicare, which are government-backed programs for medical and Social Security benefits down the road. You're going to pay federal income taxes, which the top tax rate right now 37%, and you're going to pay state income taxes. So I believe right now there's 6 states in the U.S. that have no state income tax, and outside of that, every state has variable state income taxes, all the way from 0%, like our state of Florida, all the way up to 13.3%, like California. So it depends on where you're playing. It depends on how the contract is structured. It depends on what the contract language says in terms of how that money is ultimately going to be taxed, what strategies you should potentially think about, and what options you have.
So I happen to know that New Hampshire is one of the states that doesn't have an income tax, but then the real estate tax is higher. If you want to invest in real estate, maybe that cancels each other out.
There's pros and cons to everything in life, right? And Texas is much the same way. Texas has no state income tax, but their real estate property taxes are much higher. Now, what I would argue is it's really nice to have the optionality to pay the taxes if you want to pay the taxes, right? If you're a high earner and you live in the state of Texas, you can choose if you want to buy that house or not, right? But you're not going to get taxed just because you're making more income.
True. And also, for example, I read somewhere that if you can, of course, give to charity and getting tax deductions, and then you have kind of a win-win. You do something nice for a charity, but also you get deductions for your taxes. So, I mean, that's where you guys come in, right? To find this type of advice that can help these people.
Yeah, I mean, look, giving to charity is about the heart, but we want to make sure that we're also maximizing the tax benefit. I've never met anybody that says, I want to give more money to the IRS and less money to my favorite charity. And I think even for athletes and for the entrepreneurs we work with that are making a lot of money in a really short period of time, we use a strategy called a donor advised fund a lot, where we're able to bunch together donations. So instead of giving away maybe 1 year's donation, we bunch together the next 10 years donations. And the benefit of that is like we could get a potentially bigger tax benefit in year 1. We can invest the money over time, and then we can slowly distribute the money to charities of their choice.
So what are some mistakes you see athletes make in their financial life?
The biggest mistake I see is just not asking enough questions. You go into this and you're not the expert, and you don't have to be the expert, but you should have a decent idea of what's going on. That's where I really call it being the CEO of your own life. Nobody will care about your situation as much as you do. So you want to make sure that you hire a really good team around you, but you also want to make sure that you're involved with it. I've seen athletes get done playing sports and not know how to pay a credit card bill as a 35-year-old. And I don't think that's a great situation for anybody to be in. You want to start taking baby steps right at 18 or 21, whenever you sign and start getting money, to make sure that you understand, you start to get educated. When you come to those meetings, maybe you have one question, maybe you have one thing that you're trying to take away from each one of those meetings, that you can start to feel better and better educated about it.
So it's not just about hiring a financial advisor that does everything for them. It's also for them to learn so that after their career, they can implement this themselves.
Yeah, I would say, what I call it is like a done with you strategy. I would caution athletes, I would caution anybody to have a fully done for you strategy where you're never looking at these accounts, you're not understanding what's going on. You should have a decent idea of what's happening and like why we're doing it. And again, you don't need to be in the weeds, you don't need to be the expert. That's why you're hiring somebody to help you with this. But I do think having a done with you strategy where part of the fee that you're paying to a financial advisor should be to help educate you. I always felt like that. When I paid a financial advisor for 11 years when I was playing baseball, I really felt like part of the fee was like, I want to continue to get better educated on what they think, why they think that way, what strategies I should be doing, why I'm doing this. And I took the opportunity that I had in meetings with those financial advisors to ask those questions.
Was it an easy choice to hire a financial advisor from the beginning?
It was for me because one, I didn't have the time nor the expertise to know if I was doing it right. And in addition to that, the mistakes that I made, if I was going to make one, were going to be significant, right? If we look at a percentage point and we say, Jacob, if you make a mistake, it's going to cost you 5% of your portfolio. Well, as those numbers go up, that becomes a serious number. And I wanted to make sure that I did it right on the upfront, and hiring that team, it really helped me make sure that I did it right. I set it up the right way. I dipped my toe in the water, so to speak, and then, started walking before I started running.
Being a professional athlete, you need a certain mindset. You need to have, consistency in your life. There are a lot of great attributes that you need to have to be a professional athlete that you were. So what are some skills that you learned from being an athlete that you now can implement in your business?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is like confidence is everything. Whether you're a professional athlete or doing anything in life, if you don't believe in yourself, why would anybody else believe in you? And it's easier said than done, but developing confidence and entering a room with confidence and speaking with confidence, that can take you a long way in life. And I think I learned that a lot in professional sports. Some of the best teammates, athletes, coaches that I saw had an unwavering confidence in their own ability. The second thing that I would say that I really learned in professional sports was I learned how to fail. Life is full of failures. We see all these people that are at the proverbial top of the mountain, but the reality is those people that got to the top of the mountain, they failed a lot to get there. And you might not see the failures. They might be, hiding under the iceberg, so to speak. But the reality is they failed a lot. And what they learned by that was like they learned how to get back up. They learned how to fix their mistake, and they learned how to move on from it. And I think professional sports is kind of this bubble of failure. I mean, for me, I failed way more often than I succeeded, but I think the biggest benefit was I learned how to fail and I learned how to get back up the next day and do it all over again.
And also that failing and doing things that even when they're hard, you do them anyway, and do things you don't want to do as well.
100%. I think Andrew Huberman talks about this, that the mind actually grows when you do things that you don't want to do. And I mean, I really feel that way. I think, oftentimes I think we see it most often in working out or training, whatever it may be. You don't want to go for that run. You don't want to go do that lift. You don't want to do the bike ride. And then you do it. And it feels like you conquered something, right? And you teach your mind that like, ultimately, like you can achieve far more than you think you can.
For sure. I think that they scanned a lot of brains for that, as you said, Huberman. And I think David Goggins had the biggest part of this brain that they had scanned for.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Speaking about the confidence, you have also said that you have an undeniable stack of proof that what you do works, and you have earned your experience, and that's why you can be so confident. So it's not just empty words. You have the proof. You have lived through this, and you have helped people through that, and that's where the confidence comes from.
Yeah. Alex Hormozi has this incredible line about level 3 advice. And he really, in the level 3 advice, he's talking about the fact that you've either done it in your own life, you've also helped other people do it, and they've seen that success as well. And that's where you get to level 3 advice. And I think for me, one of the biggest joys I have is that I can take players through a playbook that I know works. Like I know it works because it worked in my own life. And that gives me a ton of confidence when I go into a room and I talk with a new family, whether they choose to work with us or not. I know they'll be better educated. And if they do choose to work with us, I know that they'll have a lot of success because in professional sports, there's a ton of things that are outside of your control. But one of the biggest benefits you have is that the money that you earn and what you do with it is completely inside of your control. So you can have an optimal outcome from a financial standpoint and still have a really subpar outcome from a career standpoint.
Interesting. Of course, we mentioned Huberman and also, other learning a lot from podcasts about finance, but also about books. And I saw you recently posted your 4 favorite books about money. So some advice for the listeners on what books to read to educate themselves on finance.
All right. So I have a pretty strong opinion on this. Don't go around telling everybody how many books you've read. Go around telling people what you've implemented from however many books you read. Don't care if you read 1 or 50. I hear all these people say, I've read X amount of books this year, and that's great. That might be helpful for them in their own life, but it really doesn't matter. What matters is what you implement. So I want to start by saying that. And I think more often than not, people should read the same books that have had the most impact on them over and over again than trying to find like the next great book. A couple of the books that you mentioned there that I thought were great was, The Almanac of Naval Ravikant is an incredible book on wealth and happiness. And the biggest thing I learned in that book was how to use leverage in your own life. I used to think leverage was just a finance term, but how to use leverage from a time perspective, from a people's perspective. Another book that's in there is Unreasonable Hospitality. Unreasonable Hospitality is about 11 Madison Park, which is was voted the #1 restaurant in the world. It has nothing to do with money, but it actually has everything to do with money because the reason why they become the #1 restaurant in the world, it didn't have anything to do with their food. It had everything to do with all these little details that they went out of their way to do. And I love this line that we use a lot in our business, that we do things that don't scale in order to scale. And I think that book epitomizes that.
Interesting. The listeners should write those down and buy them. I will do for sure.
Yeah, they're great.
On a different topic, are there any downsides of being a pro athlete?
I think there's a lot of downsides. Let me preface this by saying that being a professional athlete, I think, is the greatest job in the world. With that being said, traveling around the country, being away from your family all the time is not a whole lot of fun. Feeling the downside of failure in those moments is not a lot of fun. Driving home from the field after you had a subpar performance and you got booed in front of 40,000 people is not fun. With that being said, the upsides and the lessons and the things that professional sports gives you and potentially gives you far outweighs the downsides. But just like anything in life, there's pros and cons to everything.
That's true. So how would you define success?
I love that question. I always define it in 2 separate ways. I define it in my personal life, and I would define it in my business life. In my business life, I really want to make an impact on the people we work with. So success to me there's no dollar amount that I put to success. What I want is that people that work with us know that like we are on the bus, we are there to help them. They feel like we've made an actual impact in their life outside of just helping them manage their money and make strategic decisions. They feel like they have a friend. They feel like they have somebody they can lean on. In my personal life, I want my kids to grow up and say that they either, I want my daughters to marry somebody and say, I want them to be like my dad was to me. Or I want my son to grow up and say, I want to be like my dad was to me. That does not mean that I'm the perfect dad out there, but I certainly strive to make an impact in my kids' lives. And that's the feeling that I had with my own dad was, man, if I could just live up to what he did for me, that would be a success. And I feel the same way about being a husband to my wife, making sure that I'm there for her when she needs me and making sure that all the sacrifices that she's made for me, I understand those and that I try to give those back to her tenfold.
Mm. You want to be a great father to your kids, and you said that you looked up to your father. Sad to read that he passed away a couple of years ago. I'm sorry for your loss. What did he mean to you in your life?
Yeah, he meant everything to me. I mean, my dad my dad was always there. So we talk about successes, we talk about managing money, we talk about making money. The best thing you can do for anybody in your own life is to be present in their life. There's no amount of money that can replace being present. You mentioned my dad passed away a few years ago. To give the viewers context, my dad was perfectly healthy, got a cancer diagnosis, and 6 months later, he was gone. And I tell you guys that because in those 6 months, we never had a conversation about, I wish I would have done this. It was, man, I'm just so glad you were there for me. And there wasn't any conversation about the amount of money that he helped us with or what he did in business or anything like that. It was just that he was there. And that's what I would tell everybody listening is like the best gift you can give to anybody is being present in their life.
That's beautiful. And it goes to what we said before also with you remember the experiences. You don't necessarily remember things. So being there and experience things together, that's what stays with you.
100%.
Has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Plenty of bumps. More bumps than smooth roads for sure. You know, I think at the beginning when I first started having bumps in the road, it was hard to overcome them because I'd never experienced them before. And it was the first time I was facing setbacks and failures. And I think with every successive setback and failure, you start to learn more about yourself, start to learn what it feels like to pick yourself back up again. You start to learn that, like, I got to get over this and move on to the next thing. Again, I think it goes back to learning how to fail. Nobody grows up wanting to fail. I mean, I have 4 kids and I watch them fail sometimes and they really struggle with failure, right? They might get really emotional when they fail. And as you start to grow up, you start to learn that failure is an inevitable part of life, right? Like everybody fails. And I think for me, understanding how to fail and not being scared of it has been such an unlock in my life. I am not scared to fail. I'm not scared to fail privately. I'm not scared to fail publicly because I know I'll continue to get back up and do the thing. When I can continue to get back up and do the thing, my success is inevitable. It might take time, it might take more failures, but the success is inevitable.
I feel also that if you have been booed in front of 40,000 people, as you said before, maybe some other like bumps seem smaller in comparison to how you felt at that point.
Yeah, somebody asked me a question about, I post a lot on social media, as you mentioned, and somebody asked me a question about the negative part of social media. And I kind of laughed and I said, oh, yeah, certainly I get some negative stuff on social media. I was like, if I can't handle a few negative comments or somebody not disagreeing with my opinion, how on earth did I handle pitching in front of all those people? And I think it definitely puts everything in life in perspective.
For sure. Why did you decide to quit your MLB career?
It's a great question. I decided to stop playing because I felt like my heart was no longer in the day-to-day grind of it. And in order to compete at that level, it's not about just showing up when the lights are on and it's time to perform. It's about showing up when the lights aren't on every single day, doing all the little work just to have a chance to succeed when the lights are on. And after my last year in 2019, I remember talking to my wife about it. I just said, I just don't think my heart's in it. And I had opportunities to continue to play, but I felt like honestly, I would be taking a spot away from somebody who would be putting in more work and have a better chance of success. And frankly, I felt like there were other things in my life that I was ready to start pursuing, personal finance being one of them. And I'm thankful I did it when I did it because it allowed me kind of this jump start and head start of my second career.
Was it important for you to stop on your own terms?
As I look back on it now, I mean, it was kind of nice, I guess, in a sense, but I didn't really think about it like that. My whole goal with professional sports when I first signed was the mantra I gave myself was I want to work as hard as I can and I want to give myself every opportunity to succeed. And whatever happens after I do all those things, I'm okay with it. And I really felt like I essentially lifted up every rock and tried to discover every ounce of my own ability to make sure that I would potentially have success on the field. Now, look, the success in the field, I wish it would have been more. But the reality was, I felt like I put in all the work. And I can sit here and say that I have no regrets around it. And I think that's the biggest benefit I have is like feeling that way and having that mindset from the beginning.
That's a great feeling. When I watch baseball, the first thing I think about is like how their elbows are feeling. So from being a pitcher, like no troubles with injuries and so forth in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few things with my body that are a little bit weird. I got a messed up hip and I have a elbow that has a screw or two in it. But in the grand scheme of things, I was very fortunate from an injury standpoint. And also, I think when you look at baseball in particular, we are fortunate as professional athletes compared to some of the other pro sports that are out there in terms of like what our bodies look like or feel like whenever we get done with our playing careers.
Yeah. What is your best advice for someone who wants to get into the sports industry?
I would say be all in. And you need to understand that you should be all in before you start down the path. What I mean by that is there's no easy way. There's no magic bullet. There's no secret sauce. There's no one connection that's going to make it happen. Time in the game is what's going to make it happen. But it is going to take more time than you think, and it's going to take way more effort than you think. I say that because I left professional sports with a lot of inherent connections, right? I'd been around this thing for 11 years, and doing sports outside of being a professional athlete has still been challenging. And I fly around the country and I go to a lot of things, and it requires a lot. So if you want to do it, I think it's an awesome thing to be a part of, but you got to be all in.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. Who from your network do you think would be a good guest on this podcast?
I think Darren Heitner would be a good guess.
He's actually been a guest.
Oh, he's been a guest. Okay.
He was a good guest.
Darren's kind of an OG in the NIL space. I think he'd be a great guest. Man, I know so many good agents now, and it's amazing to hear their stories. I think any of those guys, the war stories that agents that have been in the business for a long time can give you is pretty incredible too.
For sure. Yeah, before I let you go, is there anything that I haven't mentioned that you want to bring up?
No, I appreciate you having me on. I thought the questions were really thought-provoking, and I hope that the listeners out there really get something to take away from the podcast today.
Definitely. And I did for sure. And if someone wants to, we mentioned you put out a lot of content. So how do they find you easiest on social media?
Yeah, so I post every day on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube under the Jacob Turner on most platforms, and would love to connect with you. Reach out, send me a direct message. I try to respond to most of them.
Great. Jacob, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast.
Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.